This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Love Conquers All by Robert C. Benchley. Read by Ted DeLorme in Fort Mill, South Carolina during July and August of 2006. Chapter 16. Opera Synopses. Some sample outlines of grand opera plots for home study. 1. Die Meistergenossenschaft. Scene: the forests of Germany. Time: antiquity. Cast: Strudel, god of rain; Schmalz, god of slight drizzle; Immergluck, goddess of the 6 primary colors; Ludwig das Eiweiß, the Knight of the Iron Duck; the Woodpecker. Argument: the basis of Die Meistergenossenschaft is an old legend of Germany which tells how the whale got his stomach. Act 1. The Rhine at low tide just below Weltschnoffen. Immergluck has grown weary of always sitting on the same rock with the same fishes swimming by every day, and sends for Schwül to suggest something to do. Schwül asks her how she would like to have pass before her all the wonders of the world fashioned by the hand of man. She says, rotten. He then suggests that Ringblatz, son of Pflügt, be made to appear before her and fight a mortal combat with the Iron Duck. This pleases Immergluck, and she summons to her the 4 dwarfs: hot water, cold water, cool and cloudy. She bids them bring Ringblatz to her. They refuse because Pflügt has at one time rescued them from being buried alive by acorns, and, in a rage, Immergluck strikes them all dead with a thunderbolt. Act 2. A mountain pass. Repenting of her deed, Immergluck has sought advice of the giants, Offen and Besitz, and they tell her that she must procure the magic zither, which confers upon its owner the power to go to sleep while apparently carrying on a conversation. This magic zither has been hidden for 300 centuries in an old bureau drawer guarded by the Iron Duck, and, although many have attempted to rescue it, all have died of a strange ailment, just as success was within their grasp. But Immergluck calls to her side Dampfboot, the tinsmith of the gods, and bids him make for her a Tarnhelm, or invisible cap, which will enable her to talk to people without their understanding a word she says. For $1.50 extra, Dampfboot throws in a magic ring which renders its wearer insensible. Thus armed, Immergluck starts out for Valhalla, humming to herself. Act 3. The forest before the Iron Duck's bureau drawer. Merglitz, who has up till this time held his peace, now descends from a balloon and demands the release of Betty. It has been the will of Wotan that Merglitz and Betty should meet on Earth and hate each other like poison. But Zweiback, the druggist of the gods, has disobeyed and concocted a love potion which has rendered the young couple very unpleasant company. Wotan, enraged, destroys them with a protracted heat spell. Encouraged by this sudden turn of affairs, Immergluck comes to Earth in a boat drawn by 4 white Holsteins, and, seated alone on a rock, remembers aloud to herself the days when she was a girl. Pilgrims from Augenblick on their way to worship at the shrine of Shmer, hear the sound of reminiscence coming from the rock, and stop in their march to sing a hymn of praise for the drying up of the crops. They do not recognize Immergluck, as she has her hair done differently, and think that she is a beggar girl selling pencils. In the meantime, Ragel, the paper cutter of the gods, has fashioned himself a sword on the forge of Schmaltz, and has called the weapon Assistance in Emergency. Armed with Assistance in Emergency, he comes to Earth, determined to slay the Iron Duck and carry off the beautiful Irma. But Frimsel overhears the plan and has a drink brewed which is given to Ragel in a golden goblet, and which, when drunk, makes him forget his past and causes him to believe that he is Schnorr, the god of fun. While laboring under this spell, Ragel has a funeral pyre built on the summit of a high mountain, and, after lighting it, climbs on top of it with a mandolin, which he plays until he is consumed. Immergluck never marries. 2. Il Minestrone, Peasant Love. Scene: Venice and All the Point Comfort. Time: early 16th century. Cast: Alfonso, Duke of Minestrone. Partola, a peasant girl. Clenso, Turino, and Bambo, young noblemen of Venice. Ludovico and Astolfo, assassins in the service of Cafeteria Rusticana. Townspeople, cabbies, and sparrows. Argument: Il Minestrone is an allegory of the two sides of a man's nature, good and bad, ending at last in an awfully comical mess with everyone dead. Act 1. A public square, Ferrara. During a peasant festival held to celebrate the 6th consecutive day of rain, Rudolfo, a young nobleman, sees Liliano, daughter of the village bell ringer, dancing along, throwing artificial roses at herself. He asks his secretary who the young woman is, and his secretary, in order to confuse Rudolfo and thereby win the hand of his ward, tells him that it is his, Rudolfo's, own mother, disguised for the festival. Rudolfo is astounded. He orders her arrest. Act 2. Banquet hall in Giorgio's palace. Liliano has not forgotten Breda, her old nurse, in spite of her troubles, and determines to avenge herself for the many insults she received in her youth by poisoning her, Breda. She therefore invites the old nurse to a banquet and poisons her. Presently a knock is heard. It is Ugolfo. He has come to carry away the body of Michelo and to leave an extra quart of pasteurized. Liliano tells him that she no longer loves him, at which he goes away, dragging his feet sulkily. Act 3. In front of Emilo's house, still thinking of the old man's curse, Borsa has an interview with Clenso, believing him to be the Duke's wife. He tells him things can't go on as they are, and Clenso stabs him. Just at this moment, Betty comes rushing in from school and falls in a faint. Her worst fears have been realized. She has been insulted by Sigmundo, and presently dies of old age. In a fury, Ugolfo rushes out to kill Sigmundo, and, as he does so, The dying Rosenblatt rises on the one elbow and curses his mother. 3. Lucy de Lima. Scene, Wales. Time, 1700, Greenwich. Cast, William Want, Lord of Glen. Lucy Wagstaff, his daughter. Bertram, her lover. Lord Roger, friend of Bertram. Irma, attendant to Lucy. Friends, retainers, and members of the local Lodge of Elks. Argument. Lucy de Lima is founded on the well-known story by Boccaccio of the same name and address. Act 1. Gypsy Camp near Waterbury. The gypsies, led by Edith, go singing through the camp on the way to the fair. Following them comes Despard, the gypsy leader, carrying Ethel, whom he has just kidnapped from her father, who had previously just kidnapped her from her mother. Despard places Ethel on the ground and tells Mona, the old hag, to watch over her. Mona nurses a secret grudge against Despard for having once cut off her leg, and decides to change Ethel for Nettie, another kidnapped child. Ethel pleads with Mona to let her stay with Despard, for she has fallen in love with him on the ride over. But Mona is obdurate. Act 2. The Fair. A crowd of sightseers and villagers is present. Roger appears looking for Laura. He cannot find her. Laura appears looking for Roger. She cannot find him. The gypsy queen approaches Roger and thrusts into his hand the locket stolen from Lord Brim. Roger looks at it and is frozen with astonishment, for it contains the portrait of his mother when she was in high school. He then realizes that Laura must be his sister and starts out to find her. Act 3. Hall in the Castle. Lucy is seen surrounded by every luxury, but her heart is sad. She has just been shown a forged letter from Stuart saying that he no longer loves her, and she remembers her old free life in the mountains and longs for another romp with Ravensbane and Wolfshead, her old pair of rompers. The guests begin to assemble for the wedding, each bringing a roast ox. They chide Lucy for not having her dress changed. Just at this moment, the gypsy band bursts in, and Cleon tells the wedding party that Elsie and not Edith is the child who was stolen from the summer house, showing the blood-stained derby as proof. At this, Lord Brim repents and gives his blessing on the pair, while the fishermen and their wives celebrate in the courtyard. Chapter 17. The Young Ideas Shooting Gallery. Since we were determined to have Junior educated according to modern methods of child training, a year and a half did not seem too early an age at which to begin. As Doris said, there is no reason why a child of a year and a half shouldn't have rudimentary cravings for self-expression. And really, there isn't any reason when you come right down to it. Doris had been reading books on the subject and had been talking with Mrs. Deemster. Most of the trouble in our town can be traced back to someone's having been talking with Mrs. Deemster. Mrs. Deemster brings an evangelical note into the simplest conversations, so that by the time your wife is through the second piece of cinnamon toast, she is convinced that all children should have their knee pants removed before they are 4, or that you should hire 4 servants a day on 3-hour shifts, or that, as in the present case, no child should be sent to a regular school until he has determined for himself what his profession is going to be, and then should be sent straight from the home to Johns Hopkins or the Sorbonne. Junior was to be left entirely to himself, the theory being that he would find self-expression in some form or another, and that by watching him carefully it could be determined just what should be developed in him, or, rather, just what he should be allowed to develop in himself. He was not to be corrected in any way, or guided, and he was to call us Doris and Monty instead of Mother and Father. We were to be just pals, nothing more. Otherwise, his individuality would become submerged. I was, however, to be allowed to pay what few bills he might incur until he should find himself. The first month that Junior was on his own, striving for self-expression, he spent practically every waking hour of each day in picking the mortar out from between the bricks in the fireplace and eating it. Don't you think you ought to suggest to him that nobody who really is anybody eats mortar? I said. I don't like to interfere, replied Doris. I'm trying to figure out what it may mean. He may have the makings of a sculptor in him. But one could see that she was a little worried, so I didn't say the cheap and obvious thing, that at any rate he had the makings of a sculptor in him, or would have in a few more days of self-expression. Soft putty was put at his disposal, in case he might feel like doing a little modeling. We didn't expect much of him at first, of course, maybe just a panther or a little General Sherman, but if that was to be his métier, we weren't going to have it said that his career was nipped in the bud for the lack of a little putty. The first thing that he did was to stop up the keyhole in the bathroom door while I was in the tub, so that I had to crawl out on the piazza roof and into the guest room window. It did seem as if there might be some way of preventing a recurrence of that sort of thing without submerging his individuality too much. But Doris said no. If he were disciplined now, he would grow up nursing a complex against putty and against me, and might even try to marry Aunt Marion. She had read of a little boy who had been punished by his father for putting soap on the cellar stairs, and from that time on, all the rest of his life, every time he saw soap he went to bed and dreamed that he was riding in the cab of a runaway engine dressed as Pierrot, which meant, of course, that he had a suppressed desire to kill his father. It almost seemed, however, as if the risk were worth taking if Junior could be shown the fundamentally antisocial nature of an act like stuffing keyholes with putty, but nothing was done about it except to take the putty supply away for that day. The chief trouble came, however, in Junior's contacts with other neighborhood children whose parents had not seen the light. When Junior would lead a movement among the young bloods to pull up the Hemmings' nasturtiums, or would show flashes of personality by hitting little Leda Hemming over the forehead with a trowel, Mrs. Hemming could never be made to see that to reprimand Junior would be to crush out his God-given individuality. All she would say was, "Just look at those nasturtiums," over and over again. And the Hemming children were given to understand that it would be all right if they didn't play with Junior quite so much. This morning, however, the thing solved itself. While expressing himself in putty in the nursery, Junior succeeded in making a really excellent life mask of Mrs. Deemster's 14-month-old little girl who would come over to spend the morning with him. She had a little difficulty in breathing, but it really was a fine mask. Mrs. Deemster, however, didn't enter into the spirit of the thing at all, and after excavating her little girl, took Doris aside. It was decided that Junior is perhaps too young to start in on his career unguided. That is Junior that you can hear now, I think. Chapter 18, Polyp with a Past. The story of an organism with a heart. Of all forms of animal life, the polyp is probably the most neglected by fanciers. People seem willing to pay attention to anything, cats, lizards, canaries, or even fish, but simply because the polyp is reserved by nature and not given to showing off or wearing its heart on its sleeve, it is left alone under the sea to slave away at coral building with never a kind word or a pat on the tentacles from anybody. It was quite by accident that I was brought face to face with the human side of a polyp. I had been working on a thesis on emotional crises in sponge life and came upon a polyp formation on a piece of coral in the course of my laboratory work. To say that I was astounded would be putting it mildly. I was surprised. The difficulty in research work in this field came in isolating a single polyp from the rest in order to study the personal peculiarities of the little organism, for, as is so often the case, even, I fear, with us great big humans sometimes, the individual behaves in an entirely different manner in private from the one he adopts when there is a crowd around. And a polyp, among all creatures, has a minimum of time to himself in which to sit down and think. There is always a crowd of other polyps dropping in on him, urging him to make a fourth in a string of coral beads, or just to come out and stick around on a rock for the sake of good fellowship. The one which I finally succeeded in isolating was an engaging organism with a provocative manner and a little way of wrinkling up its ectoderm which put you at once at your ease. There could be no formality about your relations with this polyp 5 minutes after your first meeting. You were just like one great big family. Although I have no desire to retail gossip, I think that readers of this treatise ought to be made aware of the fact, if indeed they do not already know it, that a polyp is really neither one thing nor another in matters of gender. One day it may be a little boy polyp, another day a little girl, according to its whim or practical considerations of policy. On gray days, when everything seems to be going wrong, it may decide that it will be neither boy nor girl, but will just drift. I think that if we big human cousins of the little polyp were to follow the example set by these lowliest of God's creatures in this matter, we all would find ourselves much better off in the end. Am I not right, little polyp? What was my surprise, then, to discover my little friend one day in a gloomy and morose mood. It refused the peanut butter which I had brought it, and I observed through the microscope that it was shaking with sobs. Lifting it up with a pair of pincers, I took it over to the window to let it watch the automobiles go by, a diversion which had in the past never failed to amuse. But I could see that it was not interested. A tune from the Victrola fell equally flat. Even though I set my little charge on the center of the disc and allowed it to revolve at a dizzy pace, which frolic usually sent it into spasms of excited giggling, something was wrong. It was under emotional stress of the most racking kind. I consulted Klunzinger's Die Korallenthier der Rothen Meeres, and there found that at an early age the polyp is quite likely to become the victim of a sentimental passion which is directed at its own self. In other words, my tiny companion was in love with itself, bitterly, desperately, head over heels in love. In an attempt to divert it from this madness, I took it on an extended tour of the continent, visiting all the old cathedrals and stopping at none but the best hotels. The malady grew worse instead of better. I thought that perhaps the warm sun of Granada would bring the color back into those pale tentacles, but there the inevitable romance in the soft air was only fuel to the flame, and in the shadow of the Alhambra my little polyp gave up the fight and died of a broken heart without ever having declared its love to itself. I returned to America shortly after, not a little chastened by what I had witnessed of nature's wonders in the realm of passion. Chapter 19. Halt! Who goes there? The reliance of young mothers on Dr. Emmett Holt's The Care and Feeding of Children has become a national custom. Especially during the early infancy of the first baby does the sun rise and set by what Holt says. But there are several questions which come to mind which are not included in the handy questionnaire arranged by the noted child specialist, and as he is probably too busy to answer them himself, we have compiled an appendix which he may incorporate in the next edition of his book if he cares to. Of course, if he doesn't care to, it isn't compulsory. Bathing. What should the parent wear while bathing the child? A rubber loincloth will usually be sufficient, with perhaps a pair of elbow guards and anti-skid gloves. A bath should never be given a child until at least 1 hour after eating, that is, after the parent has eaten. What are the objections to face cloths as a means of bathing children? They are too easily swallowed, and after 6 or 7 wet face cloths have been swallowed, the child is likely to become heavy and lethargic. Under what circumstances should the daily tub bath be omitted? Almost any excuse will do. The bathroom may be too cold or too hot, or the child may be too sleepy or too wide awake, or the parent may have lame knees or lead poisoning. And anyway, the child had a good bath yesterday. Clothing. How should the infant be held during dressing and undressing? Any carpenter will be glad to sell you a vise which can be attached to the edge of the table. Place the infant in the vise and turn the screw until there is a slight redness under the pressure. Be careful not to turn it too tight or the child will resent it. But on the other hand, care should be taken not to leave it too loose. Otherwise, the child will be continually falling out on the floor and you will never get it dressed that way. What are the most important items in the baby's clothing? The safety pins, which are in the bureau in the next room. Weight. How should a child be weighed? Place the child in the scales. The father should then sit on top of the child to hold him down. Weigh father and child together. Then deduct the father's weight from the gross tonnage and the weight of the child is the result. Fresh air. What are the objections to an infant's sleeping out of doors? Sleeping out of doors in the city is all right, but children sleeping out of doors in the country are likely to be kissed by wandering cows and things. This should never be permitted under any circumstances. Development. When does the infant first laugh aloud? When the father tries to pin it up for the first time. If at 2 years the child makes no attempt to talk, what should be suspected? That it hasn't yet seen anyone worth talking to. Feeding. What should not be fed to a child? Ripe olives. How do we know how much food a healthy child needs? By listening carefully. Which parent should go and get the child's early morning bottle? The one least able to feign sleep. Chapter 20. The Committee on the Whole. A new plan has just been submitted for running the railroads. That makes 111. The present suggestion involves the services of some 16 committees. Now, presumably, the idea is to get the roses back into the cheeks of the railroads so that they will go running about from place to place again and perhaps make a little money on pleasant Saturdays and Sundays. But if these proposed committees are anything like the other committees which we have had to do with, the following will be a fair example of how our railroads will be run. The subcommittee on the punching of rebate slips will have a meeting called for 5 o'clock in the private grill room at the Pan American Building.
Postcards will have been sent out the day before by the secretary saying, "Please try to be present as there are several important matters to be brought up." This will so pique the curiosity of the members that they will hardly be able to wait until 5 o'clock. One will come at 4 o'clock by mistake, and after steaming up and down the corridor for half an hour, will go home and send in his resignation. At 5:10, the secretary will bustle in with a briefcase and a map showing the weather areas over the entire United States for the preceding year. He will be very warm from hurrying. At 5:15, 2 members of the committee will stroll in, one of them saying to the other, "So the Irishman turns to the Jew and says, 'Well, I knew your father before that.'" "I knew your father before that." They will then seat themselves at one end of the committee table, just as another member comes hurrying in. Time 5:21. One of the storytellers being the chairman, he will pound half-heartedly on the table and say, "As some of us have to get away early, I think that we had better begin now, although Mr. Entwistle and Dr. Purley are not here." "I met Dr. Purley last night at the Vegetarian Club dinner," says one of the new members, "and he said that he might be a little late today, but that he would surely come." "His wife has just had a very delicate throat operation, I understand," offers the committeeman who is drawing concentric circles on his pad of paper. "Bad weather for throat operations," says the secretary. "That's right," says the chairman, looking through a pile of papers for one which he has left at home. "But let's get down to business. At the last meeting, the question arose as to whether or not it was advisable to continue having conductors punch the little hole at the bottom of the rebate slips. As you know, the slip says, 'Not redeemable if punched here.' Now, someone brought up the point that it seems silly to give out a rebate slip at all if there isn't going to be any rebate on it. A subcommittee was appointed to go into the matter, and I would like to ask Mr. Twing, the chairman, what he has to report." Mr. Twing will clear his throat and start to speak, but will make only an abortive sound. He will then clear his throat again. "Mr. Chairman, the other members of the subcommittee and myself were unable to get exactly the data on this that we wanted, and I delegated Mr. Entwistle to dig up something which he said he had read recently in the files of the Scientific American. But Mr. Entwistle doesn't seem to be here today, so I am unable to report his findings. It was, however, the sense of the meeting that the conductors should not." "Should not what?" inquires Dr. Purley, who has just sneaked in, knocking 3 hats to the floor while hanging up his coat. Dr. Purley is never answered, for the chairman looks at his watch and says, "I'm very sorry, gentlemen, but I have an appointment at 5:45 and must be going. Supposing I appoint a subcommittee consisting of Dr. Purley, Mr. Twing, and Mr. Berry to find Mr. Entwistle and see what he dug out of the files of the Scientific American. Then, at the next meeting, we can have a report from both subcommittees, and we'll also hear from Professor McClicktrick, who has just returned from Panama. A motion to adjourn is now in order. Do I hear such a motion?" After listening carefully, he hears it, and the railroads run themselves for another week. This is the end of Part 4 of Love Conquers All by Robert C. Benchley, read by Ted DeLorme for LibriVox. This book will continue on future files. The LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Ted DeLorme in Fort Mill, South Carolina during July and August of 2006. Love Conquers All by Robert C. Benchley. Chapter 21. Noting an Increase in Bigamy. Either more men are marrying more wives than ever before, or they are getting more careless about it.
During the past week, bigamy has crowded baseball out of the papers. And while this may be due in part to the fact that it was a cold, rainy week and little baseball could be played, yet there is a tendency to be noted there somewhere. All those wishing to note a tendency will continue on into the next paragraph. There is, of course, nothing new in bigamy. Anyone who goes in for it with the idea of originating a new fad which shall be known by his name, like the daguerreotype or Potatoes O'Brien, will have to reckon with the priority claims of several hundred generations of historical characters, most of them wearing brown beards. Just why beards and bigamy seem to have gone hand in hand through the ages is a matter for the professional humorists to decide. We certainly haven't got time to do it here. But the multiple marriages unearthed during the past week have a certain homey flavor lacking in some of those which have gone before. For instance, the man in New Jersey who had 2 wives living right with him all of the time in the same apartment. No need for subterfuge here, no deceiving one about the other. It was just a matter of walking back and forth between the dining room and the study. This is, of course, bigamy under ideal conditions. But in tracing a tendency like this, we must not deal so much with concrete cases as with drifts and curves. A couple of statistics are also necessary, especially if it is an alarming tendency that is being traced. These statistics follow in alphabetical order. In the United States, during the years 1918 and 1919, there were 4,956,673 weddings. 2,485,845 of these were church weddings, strongly against the wishes of the bridegrooms concerned. In these weddings, 10,489,392 silver olive forks were received as gifts. Starting with these figures as a basis, we turn to the report of the Pennsylvania State Committee on Outdoor Gymnastics for the year beginning January 4th, 1920, and ending a year later. This report, being pretty fairly uninteresting, we leave it and turn to another report which covers the manufacture and sale of rugs. This has a picture of a rug in it, and a darned good likeness it is, too. In this rug report, we find that it takes a Navajo Indian only 11 days to weave a rug 12 by 15 with a swastika design in the middle. 11 days! It seems incredible. Why, it only takes 365 days to make a year. Now, having seen that there are 73,000 men and women in this country today who can neither read nor write, and that of these only 4%, or a little over half, are colored, what are we to conclude? What is to be the effect on our national morale? Who is to pay this gigantic bill for naval armament? Before answering these questions any further than this, let us quote from an authority on the subject, a man who has given the best years, or at any rate some very good years, of his life to research in this field, and who now takes exactly the stand which we have been outlining in this article. "I would not," he says in a speech delivered before the Girls' Friendly Society of Laurel Hill, "I would not for 1 minute detract from the glory of those who have brought this country to its present state of financial prominence among the nations of the world. And yet, as I think back on those dark days, I am impelled to voice the protest of millions of American citizens yet unborn." Perhaps some of our little readers remember what the major premise of this article was. If so, will they please communicate with the writer? Oh yes, bigamy. Well, it certainly is funny how many cases of bigamy you hear about nowadays. Either more men are marrying more wives than ever before, or they are getting more careless about it. That sounds very, very familiar. It is barely possible that it is the sentence with which this article opens. We say so many things in the course of one article
that repetitions are quite likely to creep in. At any rate, the tendency seems to be towards an increase in bigamy.
Chapter 22. The Real Wiglaf, Man and Monarch. Much time has been devoted of late by ardent biographers to shedding light on misunderstood characters in history, especially British rulers. We cannot let injustice any longer be done to King Wiglaf, the much maligned monarch of central Britain in the early 9th century. The fall of the kingdom of Mercia in 828 under the onslaughts of Ecgbert the West Saxon have been laid to Wiglaf's untidy personal habits and his alleged mania for practical joking. The accompanying biographical sketch may serve to disclose some of the more intimate details of the character of the man and to alter in some degree history's unfavorable estimate of him. Our first glimpse of the Wiglaf who was one day to become ruler of Mercia, the heart of present-day England, music please, is when at the age of 7 he was taken by Oswier, his father's murderer, to see Mrs. Siddons play Lady Macbeth. Every subject of biographical treatment, regardless of the period in which he or she lived, must have been taken at an early age to see Mrs. Siddons play Lady Macbeth. It is part of the code of biography. While sitting in the royal box, the young Prince Wiglaf was asked what he thought of the performance. "Rotten," he answered, and left the place abruptly, setting fire to the building as he went out. Beobald, inciting the above incident in his Chronicles of Comical Kings, calls it an hendy ap ichab hint. And perhaps he's right. Events proceeded in rapid succession after this for the young boy, and we next find him facing marriage with a stiff upper lip. Mystery has always surrounded the reasons which led to the choice of Princess Offa as Wiglaf's bride. In fact, it has never been quite certain whether or not she was his bride. No one ever saw them together. On several occasions he is reported to have asked his chamberlain who she was as she passed by on the street. And yet the theory persists that she was his wife, owing doubtless to the fact that on the eve of the Battle of Otford he sent a message to her asking where in God's name his clean shirts had been put when they came back from the wash. We come now to that period in Wiglaf's life which has been for so many centuries the cause of historical speculation, pro and con. The reference is, of course, to his dealings with Ethelbald, the ambassador from Wessex. Every schoolboy has taken part in the Wiglaf-Ethelbald controversy, and how many really know the inside facts of the case? Examination of the correspondence between these two men shows Wiglaf to have been simply a great, big-hearted, overgrown boy in the whole affair. All claims of his having had an eye on the throne of Northumbria fade away under the delightful ingenuousness of his attitude as expressed in these letters. "I should have thought," he writes in 821 to his sister, "that anyone who was not cock-eyed drunk would have known better than to have tried to walk barefoot through that eel grass from the beach up to the bathhouse without sneakers on, which is what that nin Ethelbald tried to do this a.m. We'll say laughter is no name for what you would have done if you had seen him. He looked like he was trying to walk a tightrope. Hey, I yelled at him all the way. Do you think you were trying to walk a tightrope? Well, say, maybe that didn't make him sore." Shortly after this letter was written, Wiglaf ascended the throne of Mercia, his father having disappeared Saturday night without a trace. A peasant, some years after, said that he met the old king walking along a road near what is now the Scottish border, telling people that he was carrying a letter of greeting from the mayor of Pontine to the mayor of Llangoscrith. Others say that he fell into the sea off the coast of Wales and became what is now known as King's Rocks. This last has never been authenticated. At any rate, the son, on ascending the throne, became king. His first official act was to order dinner. A nice juicy steak he is said to have called for, French fries, apple pie, and a cup of coffee. It is probable that he said a cough of cuppy, however, as he was a wag of the first water and loved a joke as well as the next king. We are now thrown into the maelstrom of contradictory historical data, some of which credits Wiglaf with being the greatest ruler Mercia ever had, and some of which indicates that he was nothing but a royal bum. It is not the purpose of this biography to try to settle the dispute. All we know for a fact is that he was a very human man who had faults like the rest of us, and that shortly after became king, he disappears from view. His reign began at 4 p.m. one Thursday afternoon, and early the next morning Mercia was overrun by the West Saxons. It is probable that King Wiglaf was sold for old silver to help pay expenses. Chapter 23. Facing the Boys' Camp Problem. The time seemed to have come to send Junior away to a boys' camp for the summer. He was getting too large to have about the house during the hot weather, and besides, getting him out of town seemed the only way to stop the radio concerts which had been making a continuous chautauqua of our home life ever since March. I therefore got out a magazine and turned to that section of advertising headed Summer Camps and Schools. There was a staggering array. Judging from the photographs, the entire child population of the United States spent last summer in bathing suits or on horseback, and the pictures of them were so generic and familiar looking that there was a great temptation to spend the evening scrutinizing them closely to see if you could pick out any one you knew. "Come on, read some out loud," said Doris in her practical way. "The Nooga Wooga camps," I began. "The garden spot of the Micasset Mountains. Tumbling water, calls of birds, light-hearted laughter. Horseback rides along shady trails, lasting friendships. All these are the heritage of happy days at Nooga Wooga." I don't think much of the costumes they give the boys to wear at Nooga Wooga. They look rather sissy to me. "That's because you are looking at the camps for girls, dear," said Doris. "Those are girls in Peter Thompson's and Bloomer's." Hurriedly turning the page, I came to Camps for Boys. "Camp Wicko-McGisset for manly boys, on famous Lake Pogoniblik, in the heart of the far-famed Wappahammock district. Campfire stories, military drill, mountain climbing, swimming, wading, hiking, log cabins, sailing. They say nothing about horseshoeing. Don't you suppose they teach horseshoeing?" "Oh, that probably comes in the second year for the older boys," said Doris. "I wouldn't want Junior to plunge right into horseshoeing his first season. We mustn't rush him." Camp Wadnego Gallop on the shores of Crisco Bay, Maine, facing that grandest of all oceans, the Atlantic, located among the best farms where fresh and wholesome food can be had in abundance. Yes, but is it had, my dear? That's the question. Anyway, I don't like the looks of the boat in that picture. It's too full of boys. A Possum Mountain Camp for Boys. Unusual sports and trips. Possibly condor stalking. That certainly would be unusual, but dangerous. I'd hate to think of Junior crawling about over ledges stalking condors. And it says here that there is a dietitian and a camp mother as well. "Camp mother?" Doris sniffed. "Probably she thinks she knows how to bring up children." Just then Junior came in to announce that he had signed up for a job for the summer working on the farm of Eddie Westover's uncle.
So, in view of this added income, I felt that I could afford a little vacation myself, and I am leaving on July 1st for Camp Mio no Gonet in the foothills of the Rokomokos, a paradise for manly men. Chapter 24. All About the Silesian Problem. So much controversy has been aroused over Silesia, it is high time that the average man in this country had a clearer idea of the problem. At present, many people think that if you add oxygen to Silesia, you will get oxide of Silesia and can take spots out of clothes with it. A definite statement of the whole Upper Silesian question is therefore due and, for those who care to listen, about to be made. The trouble started at the Treaty of Noblitz in 1773. You have no idea what a perfectly rotten treaty that was. It was negotiated by the Grand Duke Ludwig of Saxe-Gotthard-Cobalt, whose sister married a Morrissey, and settled in Fall River. The aim and ambition of Ludwig's life was to annex Spielzeugingen to Nichtrauschen, thereby augmenting his duchy, and at the same time having a dandy time. And he was the kind of man who would stop at nothing when it came time to augment his duchy. In this treaty, then, Ludwig insisted on a clause making Silesia a monogamy. This was very clever, as it brought the centrist party in Silesia into direct conflict with the party who wanted to restore the young Prince Niblick to the throne, thereby causing no end of trouble and nasty feeling. With these obstacles out of the way, the greed and ambition of Ludwig were practically unrestrained. In fact, some historians say that they knew no bounds. Summoning the Storkrath, or Common Council, composed of 3 classes, the nobles, the welterweights, and the licensed pilots, he said to them, according to Taine, "An army can travel 10 days on its stomach, but who the hell wants to be an army?" This saying has become a byword in history, and is now remembered long after the Grand Duke Ludwig has been forgotten. But at the time, Ludwig received nothing short of an ovation for it, and succeeded in winning over the obstructionists to his side. This made everyone in favor of his disposition of Silesia except the Silesians, and as they could neither read nor write, they thought that they still belonged to Holland, and cheered a dyke every time they saw one. The question remained in abeyance, therefore, for a century and a quarter. Then, in 1805, 3 years after the accession of Ralph Rittenhouse to the throne of England, the storm broke again. The occasion was the partition of Parcheesi by the great powers, by which the towns of Zweiback, Ulmhausen, and Ostwilp were united to form what is known as the Industrial Triangle on the Upper Silesian border. These towns are situated in the heart of the pumice district, and could alone supply France and Germany with pumice for 50 years, provided it didn't rain. Bismarck once called Ostwilp the pumice heart of the world, and he was about right, too. It will therefore be seen how important it was to France that this industrial triangle on the Silesian border should belong to Germany. At the conference which designated the borderline, Gambetta, representing France, insisted that the line should follow the course of the Isar River. Isar on one side or the other was the way he is reported to have phrased it, which would divide the pumice deposits into 3 areas, the 4th being the dummy. This would never do. Experts were called in to see if it might not be possible to so divide the district that France might get a quarter, Germany a quarter, and England 50 cents. But it was suggested that the line be drawn down through Globe-Wernick to the mouth of the Isar. As Gambetta said, the line had to be drawn somewhere, and it might as well be there. But Lord Hay Pauncefote, representing England, refused to concede the point and for a time it looked like an open breach. But matters were smoothed over by holding of a plebiscite in all the towns of Upper Silesia. The result of this plebiscite was taken and exactly reversed by the council, so that the entire Engadine Valley was given to Sweden, who didn't want it anyway. And there the matter now stands. Chapter 25. Happy the Home Where Books Are Found. By way of egging people on to buy Dr. Eliot's 5-foot shelf of books, the publishers are resorting to an advertisement in which are depicted two married couples, one reading together by the library table, the other playing some two-handed game of cards, which is evidently boring them considerably. The query is, which one of these couples will be the happier in 5 years? The implication being that the young people who buy Dr. Eliot's books will, by constant reading aloud to each other from the works of the world's best writers, cement a companionship which will put to shame the illiterate union of the young card players. Granted that most two-handed games of cards are dull enough to result in divorce at the end of 5 years, they cannot be compared to cooperative family reading as a system of home wrecking. If this were a betting periodical, we would have $10 to place on the chance of the following being the condition of affairs in the literary family at the end of the stated time. The husband is reading his evening newspaper. The wife appears, bringing a volume from the 5-foot shelf. Tonight, it is Darwin's Origin of the Species. Hurry up and finish that paper. We'll never get along in this Darwin if we don't begin earlier than we did last night. Well, suppose we don't get along in it. That would suit me all right. If you don't want me to read it to you, just say so. If it's so far over your head, just say so. It's not over my head at all. It's just dull. Why don't you read some more out of that Italian novel? I hate that. I suppose you'd rather have me read The Shake. No, I wouldn't rather have you read The Shake. Go on ahead with your Darwin. I'm listening. It's not my Darwin. I simply want to know a little something, that's all. Of course, you know everything, so you don't have to read anything more. Go on, go on. That last book we read was so far over. Go on, go on. Wife reads in an injured tone, 1½ pages on the selective processes of pigeons. You're asleep. I am not. The last words you read were to this conclusion. Yes, well, what were the words before that? How should I know? I'm not learning the thing to recite somewhere, am I? Well, it's very funny that you didn't notice when I read the last sentence backwards. And if you weren't asleep, what were you doing with your eyes closed? I got smoke in them and was resting them for a minute. Haven't I got a right to rest my eyes a minute? I suppose it rests your eyes to breathe through your mouth and hold your head way over on one side. Yes, it does. And what do you think of that? Go on and read your paper. That's just about your mental speed. I'm perfectly willing to read books in this set if you'd pick any decent ones. Yes, you are. What do you mean, yes, you are? Just what I said. This goes on for 10 minutes, and then the husband draws a revolver and kills his wife. This concludes Part 5 of Love Conquers All by Robert C. Benchley, read by Ted DeLorme for LibriVox. This book will continue on future files. The LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org.
Recording by Ted DeLorme in Fort Mill, South Carolina, during July and August 2006. Love Conquers All by Robert C. Benchley. Chapter 26. When Not in Rome, Why Do as the Romans Did? There is a growing sentiment among sign painters that when a sign or notice is to be put up in a public place, it should be written in characters that are at least legible, so that, to quote the Manchester Guardian, as everyone seems to do, "He who runs may read." This does not strike one as being unseemly pandering to popular favor. The supposition is that the sign is put there to be read. Otherwise, it would have been turned over to an inmate of the Oddfellows' home to be engraved on the head of a pin. And what could be a more fair requirement than that it should be readable? Advertising, with its billboard message of rustless screens and coeducational Turkish baths, has done so much to further the good cause, and a glance through the files of newspapers of 75 years ago, when the big news story of the day was played up in diamond type easily deciphered in a strong light with the naked eye, shows that news printing has not, to use a slang phrase, stood still. But in the midst of this uniform progress, we find a stagnant spot. Surrounded by legends that are patent and easy to read and understand, we find the stonecutter and the architect still putting up tablets and cornerstones, monuments and cornices, with dates disguised in Roman numerals. It is as if it were a game in which they were saying, "The number we are thinking of is even. It begins with M. It has 5 digits, and when they are spread out end to end, they occupy 3 feet of space. You have until we count to 100 to guess what it is." Roman numerals are all right for a rainy Sunday afternoon, or to take a convalescent's mind from his illness, but to put them in a public place where the reader stands a good chance of being run over by a dray if he spends more than 50 seconds in their perusal is not in keeping with the efficiency of the age. If for no other reason than the extra space they take, involving more marble, more of the cutter's time and wear and tear on his instruments, not to mention the big overhead, you would think that Roman numerals would have been abolished years ago. Of course, they can be figured out if you're good at that sort of thing. By working on your cuff and backs of envelopes, you can translate them in no time at all, compared to the time taken by a cocoon to change into a butterfly, for instance. All you have to do is remember that M stands for either millium, meaning 1,000, or for million. By referring to the context, you can tell which is more probable. If, for example, it is a date, you can tell right away that it doesn't mean million, for there isn't any million in our dates. And there is 1/7 or 1/8 of your number deciphered already. Then C, of course, stands for centum, which you can translate by working backwards at it, taking such a word as century or percent, and looking up what they come from, and there you have it. By this time, it is hardly the middle of the afternoon, and all you have before you is a combination of X's, I's, and an L, the latter standing for elevated railway and licorice, or if you cross it with 2 little horizontal lines, it stands for the English pound, which is equivalent to about $4.80 in real money. Simple as sawing through a log. But it takes time. That's the big trouble with it. You can't do the right thing by the office and go in for Roman numerals too. And since most of the people who pass such inscriptions are dependent on their own earnings, why not cater to them a bit and let them in on the secret? Probably the only reason that the people haven't risen up and demanded a reform along these lines is because so few of them really give a hang what the inscription says. If the American antiquarian Turnverian doesn't care about stating in understandable figures the date on which the cornerstone of their building was laid, the average citizen is perfectly willing to let the matter drop right there. But it would never do to revert to Roman numerals in, say, the arrangement of timetables. How long would the commuter stand it if he had to mumble to himself for 20 minutes and use up the margins of his newspaper before he could figure out what was the next train after the 5:18? Or this, over the telephone between wife and husband. "Hello, dear. I think I'll come in for lunch. What trains can I get?" "Just a minute. I'll look them up. Hold the wire. Let's see. Here's one at XII LVIII. That's 12. And L is 1,000. And V is 5. And 3 ones are 3. That makes 12 1,000. That can't be right. Now, XII certainly is 12. And the L, what does the L stand for? I say, what does L stand for? Well, ask Hema. What did she say? 50? Sure. That makes it come out all right. 12:58. What time is it now? 1 o'clock. Well, the next one leaves Oakham at IXLIV. That's etc. Batting averages and the standings of teams in the leagues are another department where the introduction of Roman numerals would be suicide for the political party in power at the time. For of all things that are essential to the day's work of the voter, an early enlightenment in the matter of the home team's standing and the numerical progress of the favorite batsmen are of primary importance. This information has to be gleaned on the way to work in the morning, and except for those who come in to work each day from North Philadelphia or the Croton Reservoir, it would be a physical impossibility to figure the tables out and get any of the day's news besides. On matters such as these, the proletariat would have protested the Roman numeral long ago. If they are willing to let its reactionary use on tablets and monuments stand, it is because of their indifference to influences which do not directly affect their pocketbooks. But if it could be put up to them in a powerful cartoon showing the architect and the stonecutter dressed in frock coats and silk hats, with their pockets full of money, stepping on the common people so that he cannot see what is written on the tablet behind them, then perhaps the public would realize how they are being imposed on. For that there is an organized movement among architects and stonecutters to keep these things from the citizenry, there can no longer be any doubt. It is not only a matter of the Roman numerals. How about the use of V when U should be used? You will always see it in inscriptions. Sumner building instead of Sumner building is one of the least offensive. Perhaps the excuse is that V is more adapted to stone lettering. Then why not carry this principle out further? Why not use the letter H when S is meant? Or substitute K for B? If the idea is to deceive and to make it easier for the stonecutter, a pleasing effect could be got from the inscription erected in 1897 by the Society of Arts and Crafts, by making it read, is mixvissually the experiencing of external exklaftics. There you have letters that are all adapted to stone cutting. They look well together, and they are, in toto, as intelligible as most inscriptions. As a side note from the reader, I would like to point out that all of the chapters in this book are numbered using Roman numerals. Chapter 27, The Tooth, the Whole Tooth, and Nothing But the Tooth. Some well-known saying, "It doesn't make much difference what," is proved
by the fact that everyone likes to talk about his experiences at the dentist's. For years and years, little articles like this have been written on the subject, little jokes like some that I shall presently make have been made, and people in general have been telling other people just what emotions they experience when they crawl into the old red plush guillotine. They like to explain to each other how they feel when the dentist puts that buzzer thing against their bicuspids, and if sufficiently pressed, they will describe their sensations on mouthing a rubber dam. "I'll tell you what I hate," they will say with great relish, "when he takes that little nut pick and begins to scrape. Ugh." "Oh, I'll tell you what's worse than that," says the friend, not to be outdone, "when he's poking around careless like and strikes a nerve. Whoa!" And if there are more than two people at the experience meeting, everyone will chip in and tell what he or she considers to be the worst phase of the dentist's work, all present enjoying the narration hugely, and none so much as the narrator, who has suffered so. This sort of thing has been going on ever since the first mammoth gold tooth was hung out as a bait to folks in search of a good time. By the way, when did the present obnoxious system of dentistry begin? It can't be so very long ago that the electric auger was invented, and where would a dentist be without an electric auger? Yet you never hear of amalgam filling day or any other anniversary in the dental year. There must be a conspiracy of silence on the part of the trade to keep hidden the names of the men who are responsible for all this. However many years it may be that dentists have been plying their trade, in all that time people have never tired of talking about their teeth. This is probably due to the inscrutable workings of nature, who is always supplying new teeth to talk about. As a matter of fact, the actual time and suffering in the chair is only a fraction of the gross expenditure connected with the affair. The preliminary period, about which nobody talks, is much the worse. This dates from the discovery of the wayward tooth and extends to the moment when the dentist places his foot on the automatic hoist which jacks you up into range. Giving gas for tooth extraction is all very humane in its way, but the time for anesthetics is when the patient first decides that he must go to the dentist. From then on, until the first excavation is started, should be shrouded in oblivion. There is probably no moment more appalling than that in which the tongue, running idly over the teeth in a moment of carefree play, comes suddenly upon the ragged edge of a space from which the old familiar filling has disappeared. The world stops, and you look meditatively up to the corner of the ceiling. Then quickly you draw your tongue away and try to laugh the affair off, saying to yourself, "Stuff and nonsense, my good fellow. There is nothing the matter with your tooth. Your nerves are upset after a hard day's work, that's all." Having decided this to your satisfaction, you slyly, and with a poor attempt at being casual, slide the tongue back along the line of adjacent teeth, hoping against hope that it will reach the end without mishap. But there it is. There can be no doubt about it this time. The tooth simply has got to be filled by someone, and the only person who can fill it with anything permanent is a dentist. You wonder if you might not be able to patch it up yourself for the time being, a year or so, perhaps with a little spruce gum and a coating of new skin. It is fairly far back and wouldn't have to be a very sightly job. But this has an impracticable sound, even to you. You might want to eat some peanut brittle. You can never tell when someone might offer you peanut brittle these days. And the new skin, while serviceable enough in the case of cream soups and custards, couldn't be expected to stand up under heavy crunching. So you admit that since the thing has got to be filled, it might as well be a dentist who does the job. This much decided, all that is necessary is to call him up and make an appointment. Let us say that this resolve is made on Tuesday. That afternoon, you start to look up the dentist's number in the telephone book. A great wave of relief sweeps over you when you discover that it isn't there. How can you be expected to make an appointment with a man who hasn't got a telephone? And how can you have a tooth filled without making an appointment? The whole thing is impossible, and that's all there is to it. God knows you did your best. On Wednesday, there is a slightly more insistent twinge, owing to bad management of a sip of ice water. You decide that you simply must get in touch with that dentist when you get back from lunch. But you know how those things are. First one thing and then another came up, and a man came in from Providence who had to be shown around the office, and by the time you had a minute to yourself, it was 5 o'clock. And anyway, the tooth didn't bother you again. You wouldn't be surprised if, by being careful, you could get along with it as it is until the end of the week, when you will have more time. A man has to think of his business after all, and what is a little personal discomfort in the shape of an unfilled tooth to the satisfaction of work well done in the office? By Saturday morning, you are fairly reconciled to going ahead, but it is only a half day, and probably he has no appointments left anyway. Monday is really the time. You can begin the week afresh. After all, Monday is really the logical day to start in going to the dentist. Bright and early Monday morning, you make another try at the telephone book and find to your horror that sometime between now and last Tuesday, the dentist's name and number have been inserted into the directory. There it is. There's no getting around it. Burgess, James Kendall, DDS. Cortland 2654. There is really nothing left to do but to call him up. Fortunately, the line is busy, which gives you a perfectly good excuse for putting it over until Tuesday. But on Tuesday, luck is against you, and you get a clear connection with the doctor himself. An appointment is arranged for Thursday afternoon at 3:30. Thursday afternoon. And here it is, only Tuesday morning. Almost anything may happen between now and then. We might declare war on Mexico, and off you'd have to go, dentist appointment or no dentist appointment. Surely a man couldn't let a date to have his tooth filled stand in the way of his doing his duty to his country. Or the social revolution might start on Wednesday, and by Thursday the whole town might be in ashes. You could picture yourself standing Thursday afternoon at 3:30 on the ruins of City Hall, fighting off marauding bands of Reds, and saying to yourself with a sigh of relief, "Only to think, at this time I was to have been climbing into the dentist chair." You can never tell when your luck will turn in a thing like that. But Wednesday goes by and nothing happens. And Thursday morning dawns without even a word from the dentist saying that he has been called suddenly out of town to lecture before the Incisor Club. Apparently, everything is working against you. By this time, your tongue has taken up a permanent resting place in the vacant tooth, and is causing you to talk indistinctly and incoherently. Somehow, you feel that if the dentist opens your mouth and finds the tip of your tongue in the tooth, he will be deceived and go away without doing anything. The only thing left is for you to call him up and say that you have just killed a man and are being arrested and can't possibly keep your appointment. But any dentist would see through that. He would laugh right into his transmitter at you. There is probably no excuse which it would be possible to invent which a dentist has not already heard 80 or 90 times. No, you might as well see the thing through now. Luncheon is a ghastly rite. The whole left side of your jaw has suddenly developed an acute sensitiveness, and the disaffection has spread to the 4 teeth on either side of the original one. You doubt if it will be possible for him to touch it at all. Perhaps all he intends to do this time is to look at it anyway. You might even suggest that to him. You could very easily come in again soon and have him do the actual work. 3:30 draws near. A horrible time of day at best. Just when a man's vitality is lowest. Before stepping in out of the sunlight into the building in which the dental parlor is, you take one look about you at the happy people scurrying by in the street. Carefree children that they are. What do they know of life? Probably that man in the silly-looking hat never had trouble with so much as his baby teeth. There they go, pushing and jostling each other, just as if within 10 feet of them there was not a man who stands on the brink of the great misadventure. Ah, well, life is like that. Into the elevator. The last hope is gone. The door clangs and you look hopelessly about you at the stupid faces of your fellow passengers. How can people be so clownish? Of course, there is always a chance that the elevator will fall and that you will all be terribly hurt, but that is too much to expect. You dismiss it from your thoughts as too impractical, too visionary. Things don't work out as happily as that in real life. You feel a certain glow of heroic pride when you tell the operator the right floor number. You might just as easily have told him a floor too high or too low, and that would at least have caused delay. But after all, a man must prove himself a man, and the least you can do is to meet fate with an unflinching eye and give the right floor number. Too often has the scene in the dentist's waiting room been described for me to try to do it again here. They are all alike. The antiseptic smell, the ominous hum from the operating rooms, the 1921 literary digests, and the silent, sullen group of waiting patients, each trying to look unconcerned and cordially disliking everyone in the room. All these have been sung by poets of far greater lyric powers than mine. Not that I really think they are greater than mine, but that's the customary form of excuse for not writing something you haven't got time or space to do. As a matter of fact, I think I could do it much better than it has been done before. I can only say that as you sit looking with unseeing eyes through a large book entitled The Great War in Pictures, you would gladly change places with the most lowly of God's creatures. It is inconceivable that there should be anyone worse off than you, unless perhaps it is some of the poor wretches who are waiting with you. That one over there in the armchair, nervously tearing to shreds a copy of the Dental Review and Practical Inlay Worker. She may have something frightful the trouble with her. She couldn't possibly look more worried. Perhaps it is very, very painful. This thought cheers you up considerably. What cowards women are in times like these. And then there comes the sound of voices from the next room. "All right, doctor, and if it gives me any more pain, shall I call you up? Do you think that it will bleed much more? Saturday morning, then, at 11. Goodbye, doctor." And a middle-aged woman emerges. All women are middle-aged when emerging from the dentist's office, looking as if she were playing the big emotional scene in John Ferguson. A wisp of hair waves dissolutely across her forehead between her eyes. Her face is pale, except for a slight inflammation at the corners of her mouth, and in her eyes is that far-away look of one who has been face to face with life. But she is through. She should care how she looks. The nurse appears and looks inquiringly at each one in the room. Each one in the room evades the nurse's glance in one last futile attempt to fool someone and get away without seeing the dentist. But she spots you and nods pleasantly. God, how pleasantly she nods! There ought to be a law against people being as pleasant as that. "The doctor will see you now," she says. The English language may hold a more disagreeable combination of words than "the doctor will see you now." I am willing to concede something to the phrase, "Have you anything to say before the current is turned on?" That may be worse for the moment. But it doesn't last so long. For continued, unmitigating depression, I know nothing to equal "The doctor will see you now." But I'm not narrow-minded about it. I'm willing to consider other possibilities. Smiling feebly, you trip over the extended feet of the man next to you and stagger into the delivery room, where, amid a ghastly array of death masks of teeth, blue flames waving eerily from Bunsen burners, and the drowning sound of perpetually running water which chokes and gurgles at intervals, you sink into the chair and close your eyes. But now let us consider the spiritual exaltation that comes when you are at last let down and turned loose. It is all over. And what did it amount to? Why, nothing at all. Nothing at all. You suddenly develop a particular friendship for the dentist. A splendid fellow, really. You ask him questions about his instruments. What does he use this thing for instance? Well, well, to think of a little thing like that making all that trouble. And the dentist's family, how are they? Isn't that fine? Gaily you shake hands with him and straighten your tie. Forgotten is the fact that you have another appointment with him for Monday. There is no such thing as Monday. You are through for today, and all's right with the world. As you pass out through the waiting room, you leer at the others unpleasantly. The poor fishes. Why can't they take their medicine like grown people and not sit there moping as if they were going to be shot? Oh, there's the elevator man, a charming fellow. You wonder if he knows that you've just had a tooth filled. You feel tempted to tell him and slap him on the back. You feel tempted to tell everyone out in the bright, cheery street. And what a wonderful street it is, too. All full of nice black snow and water. After all, life is sweet. And then you go and find the first person whom you can accost without being arrested and explain to him just what it was the dentist did to you, and how you felt, and what you have got to have done next time. Which brings us right back to where we were in the beginning, and perhaps accounts for everyone's liking to divulge their dental secrets to others. It may be a sort of hysterical relief that, for the time being, it is all over with.
Chapter 28. Malignant Mirrors. As a rule, I try not to look into mirrors any more than is absolutely necessary. Things are depressing enough as they are without my going out of my way to make myself miserable. But every once in a while, it is unavoidable. There are certain mirrors in town with which I am brought face to face on occasion, and there is nothing to do but make the best of it. I have come to classify them according to the harshness with which they fling the truth into my face. I am unquestionably at my worst in the mirror before which I try on hats. I may have been going along all winter thinking of other things, dwelling on what people tell me is really a splendid spiritual side to my nature, thinking of myself as rather a fine sort of person, not dashing perhaps, but one from whose countenance shines a great light of honesty and courage, which is even more to be desired than physical beauty. I rather imagine that little children on the street and grizzled Supreme Court justices out for a walk turn as I pass and say, "A fine face. Plain, but fine." Then I go in to buy a hat. The mirror in the hat store is triplicate, so that you see yourself not only head on, but from each side. The appearance that I present to myself in this mirror is that of 3 police department photographs showing all possible approaches to the face of Harry Duchamp, alias Harry Duval, alias Harry Duffy, wanted in Rochester for the murder of Nettie Lubitch, age 5.
All that is missing is the longitudinal scar across the right cheek. I have never seen a meaner face than mine is in the hat store mirror. I could stand its not being handsome. I could even stand looking weak in an attractive man-about-town sort of way. But in the right-hand mirror there confronts me a hangdog face, the face of a yellow craven, while at the left leers an even more repulsive type, sensual and cruel. Furthermore, even though I have had a haircut that very day, there is an unkempt fringe showing over my collar and back, and the collar itself, a Wimpet 14½, which looked so well on the young man in the car card, seems to be something that would be worn by a Maine guide when he goes into Portland for the day. My suit needs pressing, and there is a general air of its having been given to me with $10 by the state on my departure from Sing Sing the day before. But for an unfavorable full-length view, nothing can compare with the one that I get of myself as I pass the shoe store on the corner. They have a mirror in the window so set that it catches the reflection of people as they step up on the curb. When there are other forms in the picture, it is not always easy to identify yourself at first, especially at a distance, and every morning on my way to work, unless I deliberately avert my face, I am mortified to discover that the unpleasant-looking man with the rather effeminate swinging gait whom I see mincing along through the crowd is none other than myself. The only good mirror in the list is the one in the elevator of my clothing store. There is a subdued light in the car, a sort of golden glow which softens and idealizes, and the mirror shows only a 2/3 length, making it impossible to see how badly the cuffs on my trousers bag over the tops of my shoes. Here I become myself again. I have even thought that I might be handsome if I paid as much attention to my looks as some men do. In this mirror, my clothes look, for the last time, as similar clothes look on well-dressed men. A hat, which is in every respect perfect when seen here, intermediately becomes a senatorial sombrero when I step out onto the street, but for the brief space of time while I am in that elevator, I am the distingué, clean-cut, splendid figure of a man that the original blueprints called for. I wonder if it takes much experience to run an elevator, for if it doesn't, I would like to make my life work running that car with the magic mirror. Chapter 29: The Power of the Press. The police commissioner of New York City explains the wave of crime in that city by blaming the newspapers. The newspapers, he says, are constantly printing accounts of robberies and murders, and these accounts simply encourage other criminals to come to New York and do the same. If the papers would stop giving all this publicity to crime, the crooks might forget that there was such a thing. As it is, they read about it in their newspapers every morning, and sooner or later have to go out and try it for themselves. This is a terrible thought, but suggests a convenient alibi for other errant citizens. Thus, we may read the following news notes. Benjamin W. Gleam, age 42, of 1946 Ruby Avenue, the Bronx, was arrested last night for appearing in the late Byzantine room of the Museum of Fine Arts clad only in a suit of medium-weight underwear. When questioned, Gleam said that he had seen so many pictures in the newspaper advertisements of respectable men and women going about in their underwear, drinking tea, jumping hurdles, and holding family reunions, that he simply couldn't stand it any longer and had to try it for himself. "The newspapers did it," he is quoted as saying. Mrs. Leonia M. Eggcup, who was arrested yesterday on the charge of bigamy, issued a statement today through her attorneys, Wine, Women, and Song. "I am charged with having 11 husbands, all living in various parts of the United States," reads the statement. "This charge is correct,
But before I pay the extreme penalty, I want to have the public understand that I am not to blame. It is the fault of the press of this country. Day after day I read the list of marriages in my morning paper. Day after day I saw people after people getting married. Finally, the thing got into my blood, and although I was married at the time, I felt that I simply had to be married again. Then, no sooner would I become settled in my new home than the constant incitement to further matrimonial ventures would come through the columns of the daily press. I fell, it is true, but if there is any justice in this land, it will be the newspapers and not I who will suffer. Chapter 30. Home for the Holidays. As a pretty tribute to that element of our population which is under 22 years of age, these are called the holidays. This is the only chance that the janitors of the schools and colleges have to soak the floors of the recitation halls with oil to catch the dust of the next semester. And while this is being done, there is nothing to do with the students but to send them home for a week or two. Thus it happened that the term holidays is applied to that period of the year, when everybody else is working just twice as hard and twice as long during the week to make up for that precious day which must be lost to the sales campaign or the record output on Christmas Day. For those who are home from school and college, it is called in the catalogues of their institutions a recess or vacation, and the general impression is allowed to get abroad among the parents that it is to be a period of rest and recuperation. Arthur and Alice have been working so hard at school or college that 2 weeks of good quiet home life and home cooking will put them right on their feet again, ready to pitch into that chemistry course in which, owing to an incompetent instructor, they did not do very well last term. That the theory of rest during vacation is fallacious can be proven by hiding in the coat closet of the home of any college or school youth home for Christmas recess. Admission to the coat closet may be forced by making yourself out to be a government official or an inspector of gas meters. Once hidden among the overshoes, you will overhear the following little earnest drama entitled Home for the Holidays. There was a banging of the front door, and Edgar has arrived. A round of kisses, an exchange of health reports, and Edgar is bounding upstairs. "Dinner in half an hour," says Mother. "Sorry," says Edgar from the bathtub, "but I've got to go out to the Whortleberries to a dinner dance. Got the bid last week. Say, have we got any dress studs at home here? Mine are in the trunk." Father's studs are requisitioned, and the family cluster at Edgar's door to slide in a few conversational phrases while he is getting the best of his dress shirt. "How have you been?" 3 guesses as to who it is that asks this. "Oh, all right. Say, have I got any pumps at home? Mine are in the trunk. Where are those old ones I had last summer?" "Don't you want me to tie your tie for you?" 2 guesses as to who it is that asks this. "No, thanks. Can I get my laundry done by tomorrow night? I've got to go out to the Clamps at Short Neck for over the weekend to a bobsledding party. And when I get back from there, Mrs. Dibble is giving a dinner and theater party." "Don't you want to eat a little dinner here before you go to the Whortleberries?" 1 guess as to who it is that asks this. But Edgar has bounded down the stairs and left the family to comfort each other with such observations as, "He looks tired," or "I think that he's filled out a little," or "I wonder if he's studying too hard." You might stay in the coat closet for the entire 2 weeks and not hear much more of Edgar than this. His parents don't. They catch him as he is going up and down stairs and while he is putting the studs into his shirt, and are thankful for that. They really get into closer touch with him while he is at college, for he writes them a weekly letter then. Nerve-wracking as this sort of life is to the youth who is supposed to be resting during his vacation, it might be even more wearing if he were to stay within the family precincts. Once in a while, one of the parties for which he has been signed up falls through, and he is forced to spend the evening at home. At first, it is somewhat embarrassing to be thrown in with strangers for a meal like that, But as the evening wears on, the ice is broken, and things assume a more easy swing. The family begins to make remarks.
"You must stand up straighter, my boy," says Father, placing his hand between Edgar's shoulder blades. "You are slouching badly. I noticed it as you walked down the street this morning."
"Do all the boys wear soft-collared shirts like that?" asks Mother. "Personally, I think that they look very untidy. They are all right for tennis and things like that, but I wish you'd put on a starched collar when you are in the house. You never see Elmer Quigley wearing a collar like that. He always looks neat." "For heaven's sake, Eddie," says Sister, "take off that tie. You certainly do get the most terrific-looking things to put around your neck. It looks like a Masonic apron. Let me go with you when you buy your next batch." By this time, Edgar has his back against the wall and is breathing hard. What do these folks know of what is being done? If it is not family heckling, it may be that even more insidious trial, the third degree. This is usually inflicted by semi-relatives and neighbors. The formula is something like this.
"Well, how do you like your school? I suppose you have plenty of time for pranks, eh?"
"What a good time you boys must have. It isn't so much what you get out of books that will help you in afterlife, I have found, but the friendships made in college. Meeting so many boys from all parts of the country. Why, it's a liberal education in itself."
"What's the matter with the football team this season?"
"Let's see. How many more years have you? What? Only one more? Well, well, I can remember when you were that high and used to come over to my house wearing a little green dress with big mother-of-pearl buttons. You certainly were a cute little boy and used to call our cook Sna-Sna. And here you are almost a senior."
"Oh, are you 1924? I wonder if you know a fella named Mellish, Spencer Mellish. I met him at the beach last summer. I'm pretty sure he's in your class. No, maybe that was 1918. After an hour or two of this, Edgar is willing to go back to college and take an extra course in blacksmithing, chipping, and filing, given during the Christmas vacation, rather than run the risk of getting caught again. And whichever way you look at it, whether he spends his time getting into and out of his evening clothes or goes crazy answering questions and defending his mode of dress, it all adds up to the same in the end. Fatigue and depletion and what the doctor would call a general run-down nervous condition. The younger you are, the more frayed you get. Little Wilbur comes home from school, where he has been put to bed at 8:30 every night with the rest of the fifth form boys, and has had to brush his hair in the presence of the headmaster's wife, and drives into what might be called a veritable maelstrom of activity. From a diet of cereal and fruit whips, he is turned loose in the butler's pantry among the maraschino cherries, and given a free rein at the various children's parties, where individual pound-cake Santas and brandied walnuts are followed by an afternoon at Treasure Island, with the result that he comes home and insists on tipping everyone in the family the black spot, and breaks the cheval glass when he is denied going to the 6-day bicycle race at 2 in the morning. Little girls do practically the same, and if they are over 14, go back to school with the added burden of an affaire de coeur contracted during the recess. In general, it takes about a month or two of good hard schooling and overstudy to put the child back on its feet after the Christmas rest at home. Which leads us to the conclusion that our educational system is all wrong. It is obvious that the child should be kept at home for 8 months out of the year and sent to school for the vacations. This concludes Part 6 of Love Conquers All by Robert C. Benchley, read by Ted DeLorme for LibriVox. This book will continue on future files.